good evening, everyone. For those of you who are new to our series of conversations, my name is Michael, and on behalf of Whale Coast Conservation, a very warm welcome to all of you this evening. Next week, we'd love you to join us at the same time. You can use exactly the same log on as you've done this evening. And we will be chatting to Jean Tresson. Many of you will know him. He is a conservation photographer, and he takes incredible images both underwater and from the air. He'll be sharing these images with us and telling us many stories about how he took them and what they are about. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Jonathan Hall to have a conversation with us this evening. If you've followed the inspiring work he and his team does on Eco Solutions Urban Ecology, you will know about how he works with both bats and with owls. I've been following his work for some time, and I thought it would be really great if he could explain to us how he's using nature to fight nature and share with us his stories. So over to you, Jonathan. I hope you can hear us.
Okay, good. I like this first picture because it always feels to me a little bit like what owls are. They kind of represent light and dark to me. There's the sort of beauty of nature, but there's also the nocturnal side of them and all the mythological things attached to owls. So we're going to move through this, but just the beginning. I mean, this isn't the beginning, but it's quite far back that we're going to start. There you can see a picture of presumably somewhere in Africa. I mean, there's lots of arguments about whether it's South Africa or Kenya, but these are little Australopithecines. And about 10 years ago, a student from Wits University came to me and she wanted to do a master's on owl pellet breccia, which was 2.5 million year old fossilized owl pellets. She was interested in all the microfaunal deposits in there, what kind of mice there were at that stage, and the fact that there were owls at that point. The thing that fascinated me is that at that time, 2.5 million years ago, I know it's hard to believe because we kind of think litter is our own personal problem, but we littered even back then. 2.5 million years ago, Australopithecines were throwing their bones or whatever it was outside of their caves, and they were attracting rats. And obviously, if you're attracting rats, you're attracting predators of rats, which in many cases is owls and predominantly barn owls. So we know that we've had this link with rats and owls for at least 2.5 million years and possibly beyond. So that's pretty much how it works. And when we're moving very quickly now. We've gone from 2.5 million years to sort of owl mythology. But the interesting thing about it is that from that Australopithecine beginning, we've always been diurnal. So we get up with the sun and we go to bed with the sun when the sun goes down. And that's how we've lived our lives. So things that go bump in the night are often quite scary and quite terrifying to us because we're just not used to them. I mean, now we've got electricity and we stay up late and we've got children who are kind of diurnal until they're about 13 or 14, and then nocturnal until they have children of their own, and then they're back to being diurnal. But the reality of it is actually the dark has always been very frightening for us. So those owls, as little Australopithecines that were screeching outside our cave, we didn't know what they were. And we were presumably frightened of all sorts of things that we heard at night. Moving on, and probably from there, there's been this kind of mythological interest, or sometimes mythological fear, sometimes mythological adoration of owls. And this is an Egyptian hieroglyph. We kind of know the Egyptians loved falcons. They had a falcon god. They had owls in a lot of their Egyptian art. And it's never been a vague bird. It's never been a bird in all cultures. It's actually never been a bird that has just kind of had no importance. It's always through all sorts of cultures. It's featured very prominently in mythological beliefs. So moving on from there, we've gone from kind of Egypt to Athens, and this is one of those things. This is a coin from maybe 450 BC, and it's clearly got an owl on it. And the idea of the wise old owl, I often hear people giving talks at bird clubs and owl evenings and that kind of thing. They say, well, the owl's called the wise owl, but actually owls are not very clever and this and that. But the real reason, the wisdom and the owl correlation actually comes from Athena. And Athena was the goddess of wisdom, and the owl was her totem. So the wise old owl, or the wise owl concept is actually a Greek mythological concept of wisdom associated with the god that claimed the owl as her totem. So that's pretty much up to today, actually, which is, there's a picture of, many of an owl hooting outside the window. And even today, South Africa, we kind of think that owl mythology is almost uniquely ours, and it belongs to some of the African cultures that we have, that the people are scared of owls. They think owls are messengers of witch doctors and, kind of impending doom. But in reality, owl mythology is found all over the world. I mean, it's found all over Africa. For example, in Algeria, they believe that if you place the eye of an owl in the hand of a woman while she's sleeping, when she wakes up, she'll be unable to tell a lie. So that's quite an interesting mythology. The strange thing is, when I talk to people in South Africa, and I talk to groups of Black people about the mythology, and I say to them, I tell them the Algerian mythology, they all roll around laughing. They think it's the most ridiculous thing they've ever heard. I don't know if that's because they think that there isn't really anything to get women to stop telling lies, or whether they just think it's the most ridiculous mythological thing they've ever heard, a ridiculous concept. But as I point out to them, when Algerians hear that if an owl lands on your roof in South Africa, someone's going to die, Algerians roll around laughing because they know that just can't possibly be true. So, and that's really the thing about mythology. It's based in all sorts of strange, but it can be as beautiful and as strange and as dark as you want it to be. And, the mythology is all over the world. A lot of owl mythology relates to infant death and death, actually. And, in some places, I mean, there's some more bizarre mythologies. In Wales, they used to believe that if you heard an owl screeching inside the city limits, it meant that an unmarried woman or unmarried girl was losing her virginity. So, that was the kind of what the owl let people know. In places in India, the number of hoots becomes important. So if it's 5 hoots, you're going to win the lotto. If it's 6 hoots, someone's going to fall over dead. So they listen very carefully to how many hoots an owl makes. It's a touch and go thing for them. But so this is mythology. One of the things about it, I think, is that owls, I mean, historically, the times when people usually die, or animals, or most things die, usually it's very early in the morning. It's when they're struggling to maintain body temperature. Those are the kind of the death hours. And that's often when people would encounter an owl, because usually they'd be asleep, and then obviously there's an illness or a sick person, and they're sitting at the bedside, and they hear an owl at the same time as this death happens, and it all looks like the owl and the death were somehow connected. But aside from that, I mean, these mythologies are lovely. And there's mythologies, I spent 5 or 6 years in the Baviaans Kloof, and I remember speaking to some of the Afrikaans farmers there, and they were telling me that their grandparents didn't use a needle on a Sunday because it was, piercing the heart of Christ and things like that. So we've got all these tremendous mythologies relating to all sorts of things that we've carried with us. And I value that. I mean, I think we have a lovely history of believing all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So that's just a brush or a touch on owls and owl mythology. We'll get more into it, I guess, in the Township Owl Project stuff. But here we are today, and that's a spotted eagle owl peering through some trees. And you can see, I mean, they've got very kind of magnetic eyes and, hypnotic eyes. And they have an impact on everybody who sees them. They're magnificent, and everybody can get that. And that's one of those things that across the board is, even whether people are scared of them or whether people love them, they can always look at this bird and are absolutely fascinated by it and the way that it looks. So in Johannesburg, probably 20 years ago, we started noticing, we were seeing a lot of young owls handed into rehabilitation centers. And they were coming in because there weren't available breeding sites for them. And the reality of it is that Johannesburg, I mean, most cities in South Africa and in most places have a high population or a high density of trees. I think Johannesburg's been called, the largest man-made forest in the world and that kind of thing. But the ratio of live and dead trees are not there. So you have a lot of live trees, but you don't have any dead trees. So you don't have any cavities. And the shortage of cavities prevents all sorts of cavity breeding birds from finding a place to breed. There may be plenty of food for them, as there is in Johannesburg, Cape Town, all of these places, because these birds eat rats. So that's how the owl box project started. Now, this map basically indicates all of our occupied owl boxes. I think we have 100 occupied owl boxes in Johannesburg. I'm just looking at Johannesburg here at the moment. And this has taken us almost 20 years to get to this place. So it's been a long, involved project, and we've learned heaps. I mean, the first couple of years, we just had bees in our owl boxes. It was the most, I mean, I had a look at other owl projects. There were a couple that were happening around the world at that stage 20 years ago. There was one in Malaysia that was very successful. And there were other owl boxes that were being put up in places. But none of them had the African bee. They didn't, so bees never featured in anything I read. It was just, well, you know, you put up a box and you wait for an owl and you service it every year and I'll build it and they will come. I think was a philosophy out there. But we built it and bees came. And I mean, the first year of putting up owl boxes, I think I put up about 250 owl boxes in Joburg. And I think we had no owls, but we must have had about 100 bee boxes. And that was quite interesting. I got stung a lot. In fact, everyone who worked at Eco Solutions got stung a lot. We had bee suits and veils, and we went on bee courses and all those things, but we all got stung frequently. And we had strange reactions. We had some people who'd phone us up and say, listen, there's bees in our owl box. My garden is looking lovely. I'm so happy to have bees. Could you put up another owl box? And then we'd get people who'd phone up and say, listen, we've got a kids' party here tomorrow morning. If that box is not removed by tomorrow morning, I'm phoning John Robbie. I was threatened with John Robbie quite a lot in those days on 702. It was like, we're going to phone John. Eventually, I phoned John Robbie, and he has an owl box in his garden without bees, fortunately. But this has taken us 20 years to get to a place where there's 100 occupied owl boxes in Johannesburg, producing chicks every year. We put rings on these chicks. The interesting thing about all this mapping is that we can actually look at areas and try and determine why some areas are more successful than others, and how we can improve on areas that don't seem to have operation or owl boxes working, and sort of also look at environment, where green belts run, how owls disperse. The whole thing behind this project was not just putting up owl boxes, but servicing and collecting data from those boxes. And in this time, I mean, you can see a spotted eagle owl up in the box on the left-hand side. There's been lots of interaction. I mean, we put rings on these chicks every year. People come out, their kids are out, they hold the owls. I mean, they're not their owls, because you can't own an owl, but they feel as if they are. They've watched that empty box, some of them for 5, 6, 7 years of servicing it every year, losing faith, and then seeing on their Facebook feed an occupied box down the road. And they've maintained them, they've looked after them, and also they're the people who phone us if an owl falls out of a tree, or if there's a crow harassing an owl in a box, or any of those things. And so we involve them in all the ringing, and we ring all of these owls in these boxes. There's a couple of spotted eagle owls peering out of an owl box. Essentially, spotted eagle owls, if they could choose, I mean, originally we were just putting up barn owl boxes, and the barn owl boxes are dark cavity because that's what barn owls prefer. And then we were having a lot of bees in those boxes. We've kind of moved, we don't get bees in the boxes anymore because we've designed bees out of our owl boxes. So even though we like bees, but we like owls more, essentially, that's how it looks. So this is the basic box design. There are 3 little chicks, and spotted eagle owls, if they could choose, would breed on the ground. If you see them in the game reserve, or you see them in pristine areas and things like that, you'll actually find them breeding on small rocky outcrops. But in urban environments, they get off the ground because of lawnmowers, dogs, cats, gardeners, kids, whatever it is. So they've actually, it's taken us 20 years to get a population of owls, 100 pairs, to move up into these boxes. And it's, in some ways, there's quite a responsibility attached to that, because, you know, these owls will breed in them, they're territorial, they'll use the same box every year, year after year. You have to maintain it. It's one of those things that needs maintenance, because if it fell out of the tree or it was no longer there, the owl just, you know, it's not easy for an owl to just find another breeding site. So we're kind of responsible for these tree breeding, owl box breeding owls. And we need to make sure that these owl boxes continue and carry on, you know, as we go. All the boxes are made from recycled wood. we kind of made that decision. And they, you know, in time, if they do fall out of the tree, they're totally biodegradable. They'll just disappear into the soil, essentially. There's another couple of chicks. I mean, some of these boxes we mount on buildings if people don't have suitable trees. And that was always a question, will we get spotted eagles to breed on buildings in these boxes? And there you've got 3 chicks peering out of the box, having a look at whoever was taking the photograph. So essentially, this is an owl box, but really what it is it's just a cavity. And it will appeal to all sorts of other cavity breeding species. That's what you're putting up when you put up an owl box. You're actually just providing a cavity. So we've had bush babies in there, we've had genets in these boxes, we've had Indian miners, unfortunately, pigeons, Egyptian geese fairly frequently. All we do is we service these boxes once a year before the breeding season, and we take out whatever's in there, whatever other species have used it, and we make sure that it's ready for owls. About 15 years ago, there was a birding thread called, I think it was some kind of birding blog. And I used to check on it occasionally, and I saw this thing about kookaburras breeding in, or a kookaburra seen in Rosebank in Johannesburg, and that's a pretty odd sighting. And then we got a phone call from someone who said, could they buy an owl box to put into this pen, because they'd had 2 kookaburras as pets that had for 5 or 6 years. They'd never bred, and then they'd escaped, and they'd put up notices everywhere all over the show for people about their lost kookaburras. And some neighbor down the road had got hold of them and said, listen, I've got these kookaburras breeding in my owl box. Okay, so they wanted to put an owl box into their breeding, into their kookaburra pen, to try and lure these kookaburras back to the owl box. And I had, at that stage, we didn't have a lot of occupancy in these owl boxes. And I had this fear that I was going to be known as this guy who had put up all these boxes all over Joburg and just shifted the kookaburra population, so that, you know, never mind Indian miners, we now had kookaburras everywhere, care of Eco Solutions owl boxes. But it didn't work out that way. And it just lasted for a year or 2. They kept popping up. Melrose, I saw a kookaburra in my tree, you know. But I haven't heard about those kookaburras for quite a while. So I think it's all died down. And we, as I say, we have 100 boxes with owls in them. Because they breed on the ground, they often, once they start flying or once they start fledging, they'll get out of the box and they'll end up on the ground. And this is a couple of days, which is quite precarious for owls, because people see them on the ground. They're not flighted yet. They're obviously they're you know, susceptible to dogs and things, even though parent owls are pretty aggressive and will chase most dogs away, and cats and things like that, and defend these youngsters. But it is a couple of days that they sit on the ground when this is when they're in their most jeopardy, because people will pick them up, think that they need help, and a rehabilitation center or you know, some kind of a person involved in that will come and collect these owls and take them away. And it's absolutely the worst time for that to happen, because just a couple of days of being left alone, they're flying, they're on the wing, they're getting going, and life carries on. So, but it is natural and normal, because essentially there are terrestrial breeding owls, for them to get onto the ground for a couple of days. And we always recommend to people, if you can keep your dogs away. Most people's dogs sleep inside anyway, so there's not much of an overlap between the diurnal dog and the nocturnal owl. But just to keep an eye on them, usually these owls will open up their wings and click and clack and can chase most things away on their own. But this is the time to really leave them be. That third owl in that picture looks a bit squint. I don't know, I don't know what that was all about. But anyway, so this is what happens. That's 4 chicks out of the same box, which is pretty remarkable for spotted eagle owls. And that's one of the things about, well, not so much spotted eagle owls, but barn owls, for example. These are just some pictures that of people in gardens ringing baby owls with the Eco Solutions team. And we've had lots of this. And all of these people are totally, totally enamored with the owl boxes and the owls in there, the owls that they're, you know, this is the day they get to hold them while we put rings on them. They go back in the box. It's very important to remember that birds of prey don't have a sense of smell. So that idea, it's always been a bit of a dilemma for me, because there's a belief out there that if you touch a bird, its parents won't take it back. That isn't true at all, okay? But it's quite a good, it's not true, but it's of value. It's a good lie. essentially, because you don't really want people touching baby birds. You don't want them picking them up and taking them home. So the idea that if you touch them, their parents won't feed them is very positive, because it keeps people from touching them. But the reality of it is we put rings on these owls all year, hundreds of chicks, and as soon as we put them back in the box, the parents are in the box to see that everything's okay, see that there hasn't been any problems, and carry on feeding them immediately from there. One of these boxes we have, you can see there's a sign here saying owl activity. One of these boxes we have is in a main street in Greenside in Johannesburg. And last year we had a bit of a street party where we put rings on them. The police actually came and closed the street. They weren't quite sure why they had to close Glen Eagle Street for an hour, but they did. There were police cars on either side of the street. It was all pretty fantastic. But this was happening for the ringing of some spotted eagle owl chicks, and a couple of kids came along, and it was a nice, it's going to be an annual event for us. And on the roads, we've got, owl activity signs up for people to have a look at. And the reason we ring is because, there's a lot of fantastic technology nowadays in terms of telemetry and tracking and that sort of thing, but it's expensive. And we've got such a big database of owl boxes and owl chicks every year that we can't afford to put telemetry on them and that sort of thing. So we put rings on them. But all our ring recoveries are on our website. Actually, you can go in and you can have a look. And this is a ring recovery that I love. I mean, this was a spotted eagle owl that was retrapped. And there's a ring number, spotted eagle owl. Its release date, I don't know, can you see its release date, Michael? I've got your picture video over its release date on my screen. I don't know, can you see its release date on that slide? Release date 15th of April 2007. 2006. And there's the coordinates where it was released, and it was retrapped in an occupied box. We actually climbed up at a box in Dainford to put rings on the chicks, and Hussein said to me, the adult female is still in the box. So I said, that's very unusual for her to stay in the box like that. And he said, and she's got a ring on her. So I said, well, catch her. And so he caught her, and I said, shout out her ring number. And he called out her ring number. We put it into the SAFRing database, and it came back and told us that where this owl had been released in 2006. And we had that owl in our hands in October 2014. So it had been out for 8 years, 6 months, and 12 days from when we'd originally ringed it, and it had moved 6.7 kilometers away and was now raising chicks of its own. And that's fantastic data for us. It's given us all sorts of things. First of all, it was alive 8 years later. It was raising chicks. It had been success. It was a success story. We also get ring recoveries that aren't as successful, and we put all of those up because that's the data we're trying to collect. So that's the value of ringing. Okay, and obviously in this project, education's played a huge part of it. So sometimes young owls do come into rehabilitation centers, and we have to wait a bit before we can release them. So we use owl like this. These are a whole lot of kids getting their first kind of look at the spotted eagle owl chick. And the other thing we do is we do pellet dissection. So every morning, is it morning? I'm thinking of which bird of prey. Every evening, in fact, owls are different to other raptors. So the nocturnal birds, just before they take off for their night to go and hunt, they'll produce a furry pellet. And they drop that pellet into the box if they're the chick, or just outside the box, and we collect all these pellets. And these are kids dissecting those pellets. Now, bear in mind, this was before COVID. So I know it looks like a post-COVID photo because everyone's wearing gloves and masks, but actually this was before COVID. And these kids dissect these pellets. They have a key, they have a little bottle that they have the coordinates of where that pellet came from, and they break it up. And it's fantastic for children because they see what owls eat. And the answer is really simple. It's rats. So if we know that owls are eating rats, we don't particularly like rats. So they're sort of an ally in our pest control. So all these kids dissect these pellets and they put them back in the bottle, and they send us the coordinates or a photograph with their phone, and we'll put it in a database. And I think that database has over 1,000 entries in it at the moment. I think it's all provided by children, and and the data we get from that. I mean, there's fascinating information in terms of what rats are being eaten in various places. We can also see trends roof rats to multi-mammoth mice, and all of those things are found in owl pellets. Sometimes we find little bird skulls, which are interesting, bat skulls occasionally, and these kids provide all of that information, and they're fascinated by it. So that's pretty much, they get a petri dish, they break up the pellet, there's a whole lot of bones, you can see a skull in there, you can see lower mandibles and things like that, and this is a barn owl, there's the coordinates, they put everything back in the bottle, and they contribute towards our understanding and of this. So this is servicing, okay? One of the things about boxes is that that's an owl box. So as I said earlier, owl boxes are just artificial cavities. That's what they are. So you're providing a cavity, and it appeals to all sorts of other species. Now, because owls want to breed on the ground, they're looking for a gravel substrate. That's what they find on rocky outcrops. They find little gravelly stones in a small copy and things like that, and they'll breed there. But they're breeding in these boxes. But obviously, we find incredible things that other birds have brought in. But this is just a mess. Maybe an Indian myna, maybe sparrows, things like that will come in here. But that's no longer an owl box. So when people look up in their tree and they see their owl box and they think, I wonder if I should have it serviced, it looks good, I'll do it next year. What they don't understand is if the inside of the box looks like that, they're not going to have owls using that box. So all of those 100 boxes I showed that were on the map earlier are all boxes that we religiously service every year before the owl season, and we empty all of this out, we give it varnish, we make sure it's still well attached onto the tree, and we clean it out and provide it with a substrate. There's an owl substrate. So you can see that's gravel, and there's two little owls in there, but that's what they actually want to breed on. That's the key to this thing, is providing that substrate in these boxes. And there's a webcam we had up with owls in an owl box, and you can see there's no sticks in there, there's nothing in there, but just filled with a tumble wash stone. We use something called pea gravel, so it's got no shot. It's a strange concept, laying eggs on stones, but what it allows the female to do is to make a cup. So she creates a cup that holds those eggs, and these chicks are basically raised on that. It keeps their legs nice and straight. When they start walking, they don't grow up with legs off at different angles. So this is the substrate you're actually looking for. And then moving on from that picture, one of the biggest threats for owls in everywhere is rodenticides or rat poison, okay? And I know there's a lot of discussion about owl-friendly rat poisons and rat poisons that don't affect owls. When I talk about an owl-friendly rat poison at a conference in Portugal or in India or whatever, people are horrified at that concept. They've never heard such a thing. And the reality of it is there is no such thing, okay? And a simple Google search will give you paper after paper after paper about the problems of rat poison and birds of prey, and how toxic rat poison is to both owls and all other birds of prey and anything else that eats rats, actually. There's just pages and pages of it. And the reality of that is that the reason for that is that what you would want, if you wanted an owl-friendly rat poison, you would want a rodent-specific rat poison. So you'd want to come up with a poison that only killed rats, okay? And that's, at this stage, is highly improbable. The reason for that is that, I mean, we've all kind of grudgingly got to the fact that we might be 97% chimpanzee, and we don't like it, but we'll accept it. And we're there with the chimpanzee. And the reality of it is we're sort of 87% rat once we start looking at our DNA. I think we're 50% banana. So anyone who's struggling with the rat concept is, but we're sort of 87% rat or roundabout. And that's why we use rats in all these medical testings and trials and things like that. We use rats, universities use rats, because we can take trials of medicine that we've used on rats and we can translate them into human trials. And with something that we share so much DNA with, it's very difficult to come up with a poison that poisons 87% of us but doesn't poison us, if that makes any sense. So, and that's the problem. There's no such thing as an owl-friendly rat poison. It doesn't exist. There's rat poisons that are better because there are multiple feed poison and those kind of things. But, you know, there's also problems with those poisons. The multiple feed poisons don't seem to be as effective as at controlling rats. So it's you know, rat poison, it's also the most common way for Chinese women to kill their husbands. I always feel a little irresponsible giving that information. I wish I could just give it to the men who are listening to this presentation and not to the women who are listening to this presentation, because it kind of feels like I've put it out there now, you know. That's how they do it in China. They feed their husbands rat poison. And actually, if you look at rat poison, I've Google alerts for rat poison, and it's just, every day there's a new incident where someone's committed suicide with rat poison, or they've killed somebody else with rat poison, or they've ended up in hospital. And this is one of the problems in townships. The problems we have in townships with rat poison is actually that they don't use traditional rat poison. They're using something called aldicarb, which they're bringing into the country. It's actually, as far as I know, it's illegal in South Africa. It's definitely illegal in the EU. And they use it, they mix it into mealie meal, and they leave it lying around the house to kill rats, because rats are such a problem in these areas. And toddlers get up, pick up the mealie meal, eat it, and end up in hospital, or in some cases actually dead. So there's no such, just out there, just to let it be known, there's no such thing as an owl-friendly rat poison. And because of the rodent populations in townships, this is where owlproject.org started. And owlproject.org is an NPO. It was started also 20 years ago. Some kids in Seba Keng were walking through a field, and they'd eaten some rat poison that had been put down by the municipality, by the Department of Health, actually. And I think one of the children died. And at that stage, I was living in the Eastern Cape, and they contacted me and said, is there a way to control rats without rat poison? And that was the birth of owlproject.org. And to date, 250,000 children have participated in this project over the last 20 years, and all in townships. I mean, obviously, all those kids who are dissecting pellets up above, we do schools throughout Johannesburg. It's not specifically township schools, but the township schools have a bit of a different program. This picture is a picture of barn owls in a chimney in, I think this was in Alex. It might have actually been in Seba King. Just to give you an idea, now these are all alive. These are all chicks that were 6 weeks before. I mean, an owl comes out of an egg, and 35 days later, it's fully grown. So they eat a lot. They eat a lot of rats. And one of the things about barn owls that's so fascinating is that they're actually able to regulate their breeding by their food availability. So if there's lots and lots of mice or rats out there, they'll have lots of chicks, lots of eggs. I tell kids when I'm talking to them that owls can count. That they work out how many rats there are, they count the rats, and then they work out how to have lots and lots of eggs because there's so many rats around. But actually, it works essentially on the female's fat content. So if she's fat, she'll lay lots of eggs, and we're coming across 16 baby owls in a roof, 16 baby owls in a box, just because rodent populations are so high in these areas. And this is a nest. We went back 2 weeks later, and all these chicks were fledged. They were sitting on the roof. 2 of them were sleeping in there still, but all of these owls fledged. But that's what these owls bred in, a space that size. And this is often what we see in townships, is inside a ceiling, baby owls like that. The owner of the house doesn't want them there because they're noisy. They often make a smell or have a smell attached to them because they're bringing lots of dead rats into the ceiling. And owlproject.org, instead of removing these owls, has as its mandate. They go into the roof, they collect the owls, put them in a box, they take them downstairs. Obviously, they involve as many children as they can in this whole process, teaching them about owls. There's a very simple expression that all these kids learn, which is Bamba Ama Gundwan, which means owls eat rats. There's nothing difficult about understanding that. And all of these kids have been exposed to rats. All of these kids can't stand rats. So here's a little bird that eats rats. They all get introduced. The one girl in the middle seems more fascinated by Hussein than the owl. And then the homeowner helps Hussein put a ring on the owl, and then the owl goes back into a box on the roof, on the same house, but just not in the ceiling. And these boxes are then used every year after that. We put rings on them every year after that, and they're out there controlling rats. And that's pretty much how owlproject.org works with rodents or with owls that are breeding in townships. And the strange thing is, I mean, people talk about mythological fears of owls people have living in townships. They're scared of owls, but there are more barn owls in Alexander Township than there are in Santon. And the reason for that is just there's more rats. So that's what owls require. They require rats. You know, you can dislike them, you can be scared of them, you can love them, you can do whatever you like. All they're interested really is if there's rats and they can catch them, they'll occur. And if you were to take them out of here, you would just be encouraging, there'd be more and more owls knocking on that door to get into this very, very rich food source. So these are kids, these are some of the 250,000 kids that have participated. They all give a hoot. And one of the things they do is every year they do a project. I mean, sometimes we get owls, like in the previous slides where there's owls on the roof and the guy in the house really is adamant that he doesn't even want them on the building. And then what we do is we take them to the closest school in that township, and the kids from the school release them from the school. They've got to feed them, they've got to look after them, and they release them at the school. And the school's a good place to release young owls because, first of all, it's quiet at night. It often, in a township, a school is one of the few places that has a playing field, an open area, where owls can fledge. And also they have a high rodent population because kids produce, even though they learn in this project, they learn about litter and why we have so many rats, but they do produce crumbs and chips and things like that for rats to eat. So schools are a good place for these owls to be released, and all of these kids participate in these programs. One of the things they do is they do an art project every year, and the bits of wood that they use in their art project is the inserts from the owl boxes we make. So we cut out those inserts, these kids get those inserts, and we go through these programs where they make art, and the art's magnificent. I mean, the art is absolutely beautiful. These are owls that they painted and made. I think we had 1,000 of these owls, and at one stage they lined all the outside of their schools with the owls that they'd created, and these owls have been put up. In fact, some of these owls are sitting in America now, and in Houston in America. Some of them are in India. There's people with these totems, these made by kids in Alex and Seba King and Orange Farm and what have you. And this is their owl totems. I think I'm going a bit slowly. So this is before an owl exhibition, and you can see every year it's a different theme. So we've got the totems, we've got owl masks, we've got the original first bits of wood that we used before we started changing the shapes of them. And it's a big day for all of these schools to present all this art out there. Here's at the BirdLife Fair. These kids man a stall at the fair where they show everybody their art. And these owls at the front is their, I think last year, that was their contribution. They were making these owls, putting them all together, painting them, coloring. So it's all owls. It's owls, owls, owls. Here are all these kids. They also do the pellet dissections. So they get the key, they get all of those things, and they dissect pellets to see what owls eat. It's very important for them. There's some kids dissecting pellets. And we get their parents involved. So their parents also sit, because parents are critical in this whole process. So all the kids who participate have to get a letter of consent from their parents to participate. And so all the parents are involved. And taxis, the taxi driver, we all, have our problems with taxi drivers, but a lot of the taxis in these areas are putting on stickers. You can barely see that sticker at the bottom of this guy's taxi. But it took quite a lot of convincing for these guys to put stickers on their taxis, I must tell you. Delina, a pretty girl from owlproject.org, was out there flirting and encouraging and all sorts of things, but there's a whole lot of taxis with owls eat rats stickers on them, And we've put posters up. We've partnered with an organization in America called Rats that did a poster like this, which said, "Don't poison my dinner." And we've got posters up all over these places at little shops and bus stops and things. There's a couple of kids looking at this poster. So what I say to members of the press that are interested in this project is they shouldn't talk to me. They should go into any one of these participating schools and they should ask any of those kids or teachers what an owl is. And that kid will turn around and say, "Bamba amagundwan." It catches rats. And that's what we're trying to get out there. Here's a whole lot of little kids. I always look at this picture and think that out of these kids is our next environmental minister, looking at those baby owls. One kid's waving. I like these pictures. So that's basically owlproject.org. Obviously, we do quite a lot of research. So we've sent home questionnaires with the kids. The kids have to answer questions. And we've chosen participating schools and non-participating schools. And the difference with things like, do you think owls can be used for medicine, or do you think owls are scary, is completely different. The kids who've participated are essentially owl-friendly. We've also sent these things home to their parents who've answered them, and we found exactly the same situation. Parents of kids who've participated are owl-friendly parents. So those kids are going home and they're talking to their mom and dad and saying, this is what we're doing, this is what we did today, and the parents are getting involved, and that's pretty much how owlproject.org works. And we're hoping at the next World Conference that we're going to get a couple of kids from one of these township schools to actually do the presentation at the World Conference rather than me. So that's what we're planning for next World Conference, which I think is in America next year. One of the things I thought I'd brush on quickly is owls in agriculture, owls' ability to control rats in farming and agricultural settings. And with barn owls' ability to produce so many chicks with rodent eruptions, they're a perfect option for biological controls in farming. And we run a project at a company on the other side of Kempton Park. We do quite a couple of these agricultural programs, service the boxes annually, barn owl boxes, put rings on the chicks so we know who they are. This year we're going to be using some telemetry on these chicks to see how far they forage. And then we let people know. It's quite nice because you can quantify how many rats are being eaten. So by collecting all of those pellets, we bring them back to the office with coordinates on them, and we put them on a scale. And just by working out one pellet has one rat skull in it, which equates to one rat, we can work out a pellet weighs whatever it weighs, and we can stick it on a scale, and we can work out how many rats are represented in those pellets. I think that project in Kempton Park has 15 owl boxes, and we worked out that in 2019, those owls in those boxes ate 9,500 rats. So that's significant in terms of exerting pressure on your pest problem. Just an interesting article. The guy who ran this or was involved with this is a professor from a university in Switzerland, but he got involved in this, Alex Roland. And this is Palestine and Israel, Arab farmers working on this project together where they're putting up owl boxes and ringing owls to control rats in these areas. It's kind of the only place those two guys seem to meet, and find some common ground is through the barn owl, and that's a fantastic project. Okay, we're going to touch on bats quickly. You can start, cutting your own throat if you want me to end it. I don't know. There must be a hand signal out there, like enough already. But I'll go through this. This is just a little bit on bats, I'll go through this quite quickly. These are bats. Bats breed in buildings. Buildings are fantastic for bats. Now, bats at the moment, there's been a whole lot of COVID-related concern about bats. It's unfounded. Bats in buildings, we get bats in buildings, and because buildings are ideal for bats. They're warm, they offer ambient heat during winter because people are making fires, running heaters so the building stays warm. Buildings are very good in terms of stability and their thermal mass, so they're very attractive for bats. And bats are a fantastic environmental asset for us. They eat a prolific amount of insects nightly, and they really are another ally. They're nocturnal, and the strange thing is I was reading a paper the other day that was talking about the protection we give to certain species, and it looks as if we've kind of hardwired to protect all our diurnal species more than we look at our nocturnal species. So we'll protect pangolins and all well-deserving candidates for protection. But most of the things we look at as or we want to protect or endangered species are things that come out during the day when we're around. And the species that are in jeopardy, nocturnal species, don't get as much protection because we don't look at them as carefully, which I thought was quite interesting. So bats and roofs, bats and ceilings, you can see at the bottom of this picture, there's a lot of bat guano, and that's fantastic compost. There is harmony between bats and buildings. We do quite a lot of excluding of bats from buildings, but we always provide compensatory roosts for these bats. So on the outside of this building, we'll put up a whole lot of bat boxes. that bats will move from the building into the bat box. And that's the best way to keep the bats there, and to also, have the insect control, the value of the insect control that bats provide, but not to have perhaps the smell or the noise that people generally complain about with bats in their roofs. But no correlation to our insectivorous bats in South Africa with COVID. We've had quite a few of those calls, people who've moved out of their house because they're worried about bats in the ceiling, or landlords who've had their tenants moved into a hotel or moved to friends because there were bats. So it's not necessary. There's no chance of you getting COVID. We're of the unwavering belief that there's no chance of you getting COVID from the bats in your ceiling. But if there are a problem because of smell or because of noise, if you contact Eco Solutions, they can help you through that. And as far as I know, we're the only fully permitted nature conservation organization that works with bats in terms of bat removals and bat exclusions. Not in terms of keeping bats. There's rehabilitation centers that are permitted, but in terms of the exclusion of bats, that's us. So there's just a pre and a post. So we vacuum all these roofs, and we take all that guano and we use it. It's fantastic compost, bat guano. So we use it for flower beds, and we give it to the homeowner and they can put on their vegetable patch. In agriculture, bats are tremendous. I mean, the reason we haven't had bats in all these areas is because we've systematically excluded them for 150 years of farming. So we've got rid of trees that were dead, we've used them for firewood, we've planted monoculture crops that doesn't allow bats in. There's a move at the moment to move bats and to use bats in agriculture, and we're very busy with that. We map everything, distance to water. Water is a very important consideration for bats. They drink a lot. In fact, one of the things that we find is that the actual quality of water is important to bats. So for bats, a bat's a mammal. It produces a pup and it produces milk. So in order to produce that milk, it needs calcium. And many insects are very low in calcium content. So they get calcium from water. So they'll often be drawn to harder water than softer water because the harder water has high calcium content. So bats are pretty much finding water with more calcium in than water with less calcium in, because it helps them produce milk for their pups. That's what a bat bank looks out in agriculture. At the bottom there, you can see that green tray. We collect all the guano from these bat banks so that we can see what they've been eating. You can even do isotope analysis on this to get to species of insect they're eating, type of bat, all sorts of information that we can get from the guano. And also to check occupancy. It's difficult to check occupancy on these things. You shine a torch up there, you've got a mirror up there. And often people, their bat boxes have bats, but they don't think they do because they can't see the bats. And the tray takes care of that, because you can see from a tray, that's bat guano in a tray underneath the bat bank. And you can clearly see that this bat bank is occupied. What's interesting is that point there where you seem to have more bat guano than the others actually illustrates these are all 3 different bat banks. So they've all got different internal designs. So that guano indicates that the one to the far left, which was the nursery box, has got more occupancy than the other 2. And that helps us when we're designing bat boxes, because we're constantly trying to improve and get to a perfect blueprint. You asked me before you spoke to me to talk a little bit about the success of these things and what's happened. And, owlproject.org essentially, it won a BirdLife South Africa award for an Eagle Owl award for lifetime contribution to conservation or bird conservation. We did a project last year in Austria. These are Austrian kids dissecting pellets. They'd never done that before. And on the screen behind them was all the kids from Alex dissecting their pellets. They were talking to each other. And the South African kids were magnificent. They were so alive and so involved. And the Austrian kids were all kind of quite sedate and quite quiet. It was quite remarkable. This was the World Owl Conference in Portugal in 2016, I think. And we presented owlproject.org there, and talking about what was going on in South Africa. This was the Owl Hall of Fame for owlproject.org. It's been inaugurated as a project into the Owl Hall of Fame, which is very nice. There's a lot of very fascinating owl experts who have received this, and it's done in Houston by the Owl Center, International Owl Center. And this was India last year, December 2019. The Owl Conference was presented, the Owl Project was presented there as well. And I think this is my last picture. This was Jane Goodall's been very supportive of our project, especially in her visits to South Africa, and she really likes the project and likes what's happening. There's our email address, ecosolutions@owlproject.org, and that's it.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was really fascinating. If any of you have questions, please will you type them in the Q&A or in the chat. I've already got a few coming in, but maybe I'll just start. I just want to say, if any of you would like to support the work that Jonathan and his team does, he would really welcome donations. All of that money goes to put these boxes, bat boxes, owl boxes up in schools and support the brilliant work that he and his team are doing. So you can see the details on the page, and we'd really support. He would really support donations of any size.
Sorry, Michael, can I just say one thing? That would be through owlproject.org.
Sorry.
That's the project that is an NPO. That's what runs all the township and all the Owl Project work that we do. Like that would be owlproject.org.
Brilliant. Just quickly, I asked you when chatting to Jane Goodall. I don't know if you chatted about the people like her, like yourself, who keep getting out of bed every day, and despite some of the bad news we hear, keep going out there and doing what you do. You mentioned something about seeing the little kitties. What inspires you to keep going on and keep doing what you do despite some of the negative news we hear?
Well, it's quite easy. I mean, if I'm having a rough week or a bad day or whatever, I just have to get in my car and drive into Alex, drive into Sebo King, go to one of these schools, chat to some of these kids, see what they're busy with. And they really, sometimes I wonder if this project is happening because I like owls, which I've always been involved with, or whether I like kids. I'm not quite sure which it is, but we seem to have this place where we meet in the middle. When I open a basket and there's 6 baby barn owls in there and those kids are all standing around looking in that basket, I know that at that moment we're both seeing the same thing. And I like that. And I mean, you see that art that those kids are producing, and you drive through Alex and it's dreary. And you go into a classroom and there's kids painting with colors and producing owl art and enthusiastic. I mean, those kids are actually renaming owls in the 11 official languages. So we've got kids working out new names for owls that are applicable to, in Zulu, historically an owl was just Isikova. Now they've got all sorts of names for each individual owl. And I think that's going to be very important going forward, so that they can actually identify owl by what owl it is rather than just the generic owl. But that's they fantastic.
Jonathan, I'm getting a lot of questions coming in, so we'll try to rattle through as many as we can. We still have 160 people online asking questions, so let's try get through as many. A few people have asked, how do I attract owls to an empty box? Some people have had a box for 3 years, 7 years. Some have had one just for 1 year. Is there anything they can do apart from the yearly service? Anything they can do to attract the owls? And that's the bat. Someone's also asked if they've had a bat box, but no bat.
That's a question we get often. And we have a lot of people who have had boxes. We've had people whose boxes have been occupied after 2 weeks. But we've had a lot of people who've sat for ages before occupancy. For us, in terms of running a project like this, our unoccupied boxes are just as important to us as our occupied boxes, because that's the data that we're getting. But the service is critical. We can't guarantee occupancy, but what we're seeing is over the last 15 years, the increase in occupied owl boxes is growing exponentially. And the reason for that is that all of those chicks that you see being ringed in those photographs and those occupied owl boxes, those are all essentially owl box breeding owls. So they'll look to replicate, it's called Natal Recognition. They'll look to replicate the site in which they were bred, because if they've reached maturity and they're able to breed, they were successfully bred from that site. So they'll go around looking for owl boxes to breed in. And that's what we're seeing. We're starting to see owl chicks that we've put rings on that are now taking occupancy in owl boxes themselves. So that's essentially all it is. I mean, obviously not to use rat poison, things like that. But, owl boxes are just a cavity in a tree. And at some stage it'll get to saturation. But, that's really the key to this thing. Is just make sure that your box is serviced. spotted eagle owls breed. They start breeding. Generally, the shortest day of the year is their trigger. So around about, June, we've just had it. They start calling. That photo period, kind of lets them know that it's time to start breeding. And that's when that box needs to be serviced and available and viable for them. And that's really the only way. I mean, we're doing a lot of owl releases from schools, and those owls that are being released from schools will complement the owl population in these areas. But essentially, that's it. I mean, I always want people to look at the Owl Box project as a project that they're part of. That even though they have an empty box, they're part of a project that has 100 occupied boxes, and they're enjoying the success of the project as much as we all are. People with occupied boxes or unoccupied boxes, or us sitting at the office looking at why this area has more, why that area has less, and how we can fix that and change that. That's the only answer I have to that question.
Jonathan, Mike Jackson asks, he's in KZN on a macadamia nut farm, and he says he's got a lot of monkeys there. And will the monkeys steal the eggs or the chicks or harass the owls, or could he also have owls there?
Monkeys are something we've come across throughout all of our agricultural work. And there's no doubt that monkeys will, if they can get hold of an egg, they'll eat it. It's a treasure. But a spotted eagle will stand up or will sit on the eggs, open its wings, click and clack. And it takes quite a lot for a monkey to get an owl off an egg, to be honest. But it's, even though owls breed at certain times of the year, they usually have a bit of a fail-safe so that if they lose a clutch of eggs, they can recycle quite quickly, usually within 2 or 3 weeks, and relay another clutch. They might choose another nest if they've been harassed continuously, but it goes with the territory, so to speak. I think, we've got a lot of farms with monkeys and occupied owl boxes and occupied bat boxes. And we do a lot of stuff with bats and macadamias, because bats will eat things like stink bug, which is a problem in macadamia. And that we've picked up from the bat guana and false codling moth and things like that. So bats and owls are very good in macadamia.
Jonathan, how many mosquitoes does a bat eat in one night roundabout? And another question, how do the bats actually get into the bat boxes? Someone's asking, how do they get in?
Okay, so the easiest part is how they get in. Those bat boxes are all open beneath. So underneath them, you see that bat bank, but underneath that, that's open. And inside there is a whole lot of intricate fins, so they can get into almost artificial ledges that are covered in a netting so they can climb up. But we put temperature loggers in there to make sure to see which are the most successful, and it's a new science, so we're sort of improving all the time. But in the bat bank, you can see there's a white landing pad underneath it. So there's a box with a white square underneath with netting. They land on that and they crawl up into the box from there. In terms of how many mosquitoes are, we get this question, and at one stage I heard someone on the phone, someone was asking them, how many mosquitoes does a bat eat? And we say lots and lots. And then somebody said all of them. And I kind of thought, well, let's try and work it out. And the most difficult thing, how it works is this. If you take something like a Cape Serotine bat, which weighs 6 to 7 grams, and when that female we used a lactating female, she's producing milk for a pup, can consume up to 100% of her body weight every single night. So that's 7 grams. But we worked on a bit of a conservative 60% of her body weight. And then we needed to find out what mosquito weighs. And that was the most difficult thing. I couldn't find out what a mosquito weighed. Eventually, I spoke to university entomology. I couldn't find out. Eventually, I got it. And it was, what was it? I can't even remember. It's on one of those articles I wrote. But it was 0.5... I can't remember, actually. Some information I've got. But it worked out 1,200 mosquitoes a night was what a bat could eat. Obviously, if there's a juicy moth in there or a nice insect, big insect, that'll be reduced. But in terms of that simple equation of body weight translated into mosquitoes, it was about 1,200 mosquitoes a night.
Wow, I really love bats now. Shireen asks, up here in the Overberg, some of the guys here who are making boxes, their spotted eagle owl box has open sides, yours are closed. What is the right thing to do here, and what would you advise if one is having a box in the Overberg?
I actually should have included a couple of our open box pictures, because when we first started, we were trying to, get away from bees. So we were opening the boxes up as much as possible, and the open boxes worked. We had owls breeding in them and producing chicks in them and things like that. When we moved the project to Cape Town, a lot of people saying, listen, that open box is not a good idea because of the prevailing winds and things like that, and they were worried about the chicks in the box. The other thing with the open box is often you get crows landing in the tree and harassing that female owl continuously until she abandons, and they'll eat a small chick or steal her egg. And the closed box allowed the owls more protection from both the wind and things like crows. But the open boxes are fine. They work. We've had success with them. We've just closed our boxes now because we're having more success with the closed box. But we have had, on our website, you'll see there's some of those old boxes were wide open, just supports gravel in them, and we had owls breeding in them. So if she's got an open box, that's not bad at all.
And Jonathan, Elaine asked, how many owl species are there in South Africa? Do you know offhand, roundabout?
I think it's 12. Usually I count them out on my fingers, but I think there's 12. There may be 13, but I think there's 12.
We've had 175 more people on the call, and there's just so much praise, just saying thank you so much for what you're doing. Portia Moyo says, please will you set up your owl hoot project in Cosmos City? So Cosmos City, she says. But maybe
school in Cosmos City. We have a school in Cosmos City that has an owl box filled with baby owls at the moment, actually. So we haven't really got too deep into Cosmos City, but we do have a little bit of a footprint there.
And people in this, if people are in Overberg in the Western Cape, are you also doing work up here? How do they sort of support the schools and the work you do in this area?
We have a few years ago we had a small branch in Cape Town. Now it's become a bit of a satellite branch that we service every month or two, where we send down guys, and we've got a workshop there, and they service our Cape Town clients, and we've got quite a few Cape Town clients. So just as far as I know, COVID's kind of prevented us from setting it. We were going to set it up permanently at the beginning of this year, but we've kind of been a bit locked down. So, but from the beginning of next year, we'll actually have a full-time branch in Cape Town that'll be able to help. But even now, if you contact the Joburg office, I think there's a trip planned shortly, and they go down and they service all our Cape Town clients and do all that kind of thing while they're there.
Jonathan, thank you again. I know we've run out of time. Thank you so much. This call has been recorded. If you want to share with anyone who's watching this, if one of your friends have missed this conversation, it will be up live tomorrow to share. And maybe as a final question, Jonathan, I know it's probably a bit of a strange theory, but are rats actually farming us, or
that's what I tell people. No one likes hearing that, but I'm pretty convinced that rats are farming humans. It's not a popular theory by any means, but it kind of feels that way. We've got rats all over the world. We can't seem to get rid of them. They pop up wherever we pop up. And I get the feeling there might be some direction going on, driven and directed by the sort of rat committee. We need more people here. We need more people there. That sort of thing. So it's my own philosophy. I haven't found too many followers though.
Thanks again. Thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate what you're doing. Keep it up, and please support the brilliant work Jonathan's doing. Thank you for taking the time. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Michael.
Keep well. Cheers.
Yeah, bye.